In September of 1952, something was seen in the sky over a small town in West Virginia, and minutes later, people went looking for it. It didn't land in a city, it came down near the hills, just outside town. A group decided to investigate. When they reached the location, they didn't just see something unusual. They noticed something else first, a strong smell, metallic, like something burning in the air. And then they saw it, a figure, tall, motionless, watching from the darkness. Decades later, this encounter would become known as the Flatwoods Monster case. But what really happened that night may be far more complex than the story suggests, and may not be fully explained through a single interpretation of the facts. On the night of September 12, 1952, multiple people across different parts of the United States reported seeing a bright light moving across the sky. The object was described as a glowing sphere with shades of red and orange, traveling at high speed. Similar reports appeared in different areas, including other parts of West Virginia and neighboring states. Witnesses described the same light, visible for several seconds, moving in a continuous trajectory. This pattern is consistent with atmospheric phenomena, such as meteors, suggesting that the initial event was not isolated. In fact, 1952 would later be considered one of the most active years for unidentified aerial sightings in the United States. In Flatwoods, in Braxton County, West Virginia, a group of boys were playing near the local school. Among them was Edward May, the son of Kathleen May. They were among the first to notice the light. To them, it wasn't just something distant in the sky. It appeared to be descending toward the nearby hills. Believing something had fallen, the boys ran to Kathleen May's house and told her what they had seen. Given the situation, she decided to accompany the group. Others joined as well, including Eugene Lemon, a young member of the National Guard. Together, they moved toward the area where the object seemed to have descended. At that moment, no one there believed they were about to witness something that would be remembered for decades. The group moved toward the area where the light appeared to have descended, a location known as Fisher Farm. It was an open field surrounded by vegetation and small rolling hills. It was night, and the only light came from flashlights and the partially visible sky through the trees. As they approached the area, the environment began to feel different. There was a low-lying mist hovering close to the ground. The air felt denser, heavier. The smell became more noticeable, something between sulfur and burnt metal. The dog that accompanied the group ran ahead toward the area, but moments later, it quickly retreated, agitated, as if it had been repelled by something. The group continued forward carefully, each step slower than the last. And then, as they directed the flashlight beam toward the area ahead, they saw it. In front of them, partially illuminated by the light, there was a figure, tall, motionless, approximately 10 feet in height. Its form was not human, but it didn't resemble any known animal either. Its head had an unusual shape, often compared to the Ace of Spades symbol, like a rigid hood surrounding the upper part of the body. Its eyes glowed intensely, a tone between red and orange, not just reflecting light, but appearing to emit a glow of their own. The body was even more unusual. It seemed to be covered by something resembling a dress or a metallic structure, rigid, almost mechanical. Some witnesses would later describe it as something structured, almost artificial. Its arms were small, ending in claw-like appendages, and then it moved, slow and controlled, but not natural. Some witnesses reported that the entity did not walk, but glided, as if it did not interact with the ground in a normal way. Faced with that, the group panicked. Without trying to approach, Without trying to understand, they backed away and ran. Whatever that figure was, it did not move like an animal, and it did not resemble anything they had ever seen before. And whatever they saw in that moment, it was enough to make them run, not out of curiosity, but out of fear. After the encounter, other details began to gain importance. The smell was still present, strong and persistent, described as something between sulfur and burnt metal. It wasn't just a momentary impression. The odor lingered in the area even after the group had left. Some of those present reported physical effects hours later: eye irritation, a burning sensation in the throat, and difficulty breathing. Mild symptoms, but unusual enough to be remembered. At the site, there were also visible signs on the ground: an area of flattened vegetation, approximately 20 feet in diameter, as if something had pressed against the ground or remained there for some time. There was also a dark residue, described as oil-like, with no immediate explanation. Some reports suggest that similar ground traces had been mentioned in other sightings from that period, although not always documented with the same level of detail. The behavior of the dog was also reconsidered. The animal didn't just retreat, it reacted abruptly, as if it had been exposed to something it couldn't understand. None of these elements, on their own, are conclusive, but when considered together, they begin to change how the case can be interpreted. This wasn't just a sighting, it left something behind, and those traces are far more difficult to ignore. The report did not remain limited to the group. Shortly after, local authorities were notified. The Braxton County Sheriff, Robert Carr, went to the reported location, but upon arriving at the site, no creature was found, no visible object, only the terrain and some of the signs described by the witnesses. Even so, the case quickly drew attention. Local media began covering the incident, and the story spread beyond Flatwoods. In the following days, a civilian investigator named A. Lee Stewart also examined the area. He documented the presence of a dark substance on the ground and noted signs he considered unusual. But like the authorities, he found no conclusive evidence. The case was eventually included in an official United States Air Force program, Project Blue Book. Created during the Cold War, this program investigated thousands of reports of unidentified flying objects. The objective was clear: to determine whether these events posed any threat or could be explained by known causes. Flatwoods became one of those cases, and part of the attention it received came from something important. The initial event had not been observed in just one location. Multiple sightings of the same light were reported across different regions within a similar time frame. But even with official attention, the answers remained far from definitive. Over time, one explanation began to take shape: an interpretation based on natural factors and misperception. The light seen in the sky that night would have been a meteor, a relatively common phenomenon capable of traveling long distances and being seen across multiple regions at once. This explains the consistent reports of a bright sphere crossing the sky. As for the creature, its origin would be different. According to this interpretation, the group may have seen an owl, more specifically, a barn owl. When illuminated at night, this type of bird can reflect light intensely. Its eyes can appear bright, almost luminous, and when positioned on higher ground or on an elevated surface, its silhouette can appear larger and distorted. In a dark environment with limited visibility and under strong emotional stress, this combination could lead to a misinterpretation. Some analyses also suggest that the angle of the flashlight beam, combined with the terrain elevation, may have amplified the perceived size.
On paper, this explanation seems coherent, simple, and sufficient, but there is a problem. It does not explain everything. When analyzed in isolation, each part of the explanation seems reasonable. The meteor explains the light in the sky, and the owl could explain the glowing eyes.
But when these elements are considered together, the picture becomes less clear. The meteor may have been real, but it does not explain what was seen on the ground. The witnesses did not report just an impact point. They described a presence, a form, something clearly defined. The owl may account for the eyes, but not the estimated height, approximately 10 feet, nor the shape of the head, the structure of the body, or the movement. There is also the smell, strong and persistent, and the symptoms reported afterward: eye irritation, throat discomfort. These elements are not consistent with a typical encounter with an animal. In addition, there were multiple witnesses observing the same sequence of events. Individually, these explanations can work, but when all of these elements are considered together, the inconsistencies become more apparent and harder to ignore.
At that point, the interpretation of the case shifts. It becomes less about isolated explanations and more about how all of these elements fit together. And this is where the case becomes more difficult to dismiss, because when multiple details resist simple explanations, a different question begins to emerge. How much of this can truly be explained, and how much remains uncertain? And it is within that uncertainty that the Flatwoods Monster case remains, not fully explained, but not fully resolved.
Given these inconsistencies, other interpretations began to emerge, not as definitive answers, but as attempts to explain what the official explanation does not fully resolve. One possibility is that this was an encounter with an unknown creature, something that does not fit within conventional classifications. This idea is largely based on the detailed description of the entity and the consistency across multiple accounts. But this is not the only interpretation. Some observers point to something different, not biological, but structural. The rigid appearance, the symmetrical shape, and the unusual movement have led to the hypothesis that what was seen may not have been an organism at all, but rather some type of device, a structure, or even a form of technology. This interpretation becomes more relevant when considered within the context of the time. The early 1950s, during the Cold War, a period marked by military testing, rapid technological advancement, and classified projects. From that perspective, some suggest that the event could have been related to experimental equipment, devices under testing, or technologies that were never officially disclosed. Depending on how these possibilities are considered, they stop competing with each other and instead become different ways of interpreting the same set of events. None of these explanations are proven, and none of them resolve every aspect of the case, which is why they continue to exist. The Flatwoods Monster case took place in earnest. At the same time, reports of objects in the sky were becoming more frequent, with sightings recorded across different parts of the country, not all of them with clear explanations. At a very specific moment in history, the early 1950s, during the Cold War, a period marked by constant tension between the United States and the Soviet Union, uncertainty, rapid technological progress, and projects conducted far from public awareness. This increase in reports led to the creation of official programs such as Project Blue Book. But beyond the investigations, there was another factor: perception, the fear of the unknown, and the possibility of something beyond common understanding. In that context, the line between what was observed and what was interpreted was not always clear. And when unusual events occurred, like the one in Flatwoods, those two dimensions often overlapped. Cases like this emerged exactly at that intersection between reality and interpretation. Over the years, the Flatwoods Monster case did not disappear. Every new analysis, every new theory, returns to the same point. There is always something that does not quite fit. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this case is not what was seen that night, but the fact that no explanation has been able to depend on how the evidence is interpreted and on which details are considered more significant for everything. Something happened in Flatwoods in 1952. That is not in question. What remains uncertain is what was actually encountered on that hill, and it is that uncertainty that keeps the question open to this day. What did those people really see in the darkness of Flatwoods? Cases like this are rarely defined by a single answer. They depict, and in many of them, the more closely you look, the less clear the explanation becomes. There are other cases like this, documented, analyzed, and still without clear answers. Some of them follow a very similar pattern, and in some cases, the explanation becomes even more difficult to define. If this kind of case interests you, there are others here on the channel worth exploring, because in many of them, the question remains the same, not what was seen, but what it might have been.